Today it is another day to look at the Caro Kann. More specifically, it is the third video of the complete Caro Kann series. And today we're looking at a variation, the 92 line of the classical Caro Kann. So let me show what the moves are to this position. E4, C6, D4, D5. This is all the classical Caro Kann, right? Knight C3 or Knight D2. Black takes an E4, plays Knight F6, and this enters the Korchnoi variation, which we covered in last video. And now we're going to be looking at more specific lines, specifically in the best position, or in the best main line for white. White should take an F6. It's the only way to play for an advantage, and now play the move C3. This move is a very good move for white because it's flexible. He'll almost always play this move eventually because he wants to defend his D4 pawn. Notice he needs to play C3 in order to play the move Bishop D3, right? Bishop D3 is played immediately, then black just takes the pawn. It also it clears the C2 square for the queen, where the queen can go. And since white's going to usually play Knight E2, it's very nice to have that C2 square for the queen, where it doesn't block this bishop. So black plays the obvious typical move, Bishop D6, which we've seen before. White plays Bishop D3, of course. Black castles, all standard. And now white has two main choices, as we've seen in the databases. Most players have played Queen C2, but Knight E2 is a very common sideline. And actually, usually white will just end up playing both these moves. But today we're going to be looking at independent options following the move Knight E2. So let's cue the intro and take a look. First thing I wanted to mention were some of the transposition possibilities here, right? Queen C2 is another move that white will normally play, right? The idea is to attack H7 and play Knight E2 next, and then white can consider either castling kingside or castling queenside. Makes sense, right? In a future video, we'll cover this line because this is probably considered the most critical line. But Knight E2 has its merits too. White is more likely than not now going to castle kingside, and he's hoping that maybe he benefits from not spending a tempo putting his queen here. And this might be correct. Perhaps the queen would be better placed going to the queen side, or the king side, actually. And the reason is, normally in this line, white wants to prepare the move bishop f4 immediately, right? If he wastes time playing queen c2 and then bishop f4, maybe black will find a way to neutralize it more. The other idea is just to get this knight to g3 quickly, right? Castle knight g3, and then try to hop this knight in somewhere like this. So those are white's ideas. Black just plays this rook e8 as usual. Again, this is almost always what black does, right? Bishop d6, castle, rook e8, clearing up the f8 square for the knight. And now we just have to ask what white will do. And white has normally played the move queen c2 here, at least in top games. This is the normal move because it seems the most flexible, right? White will normally want to play this move anyways, so why waste time? But castling is a serious option, and this was played in the one game that we're going to be looking at today. And it's also a reasonable move. What I want to mention actually right now, I should have mentioned earlier, this game, as you can see here, was actually just played about a week ago. It was played on July 8th in the Bundesliga between David, Anton Guijarro, whatever that is, against Alexander Barelowicz, probably, or is it Barelowicz or something, whatever. It's like Nimzovich, so it's probably something else. Anyhow, the Bundesliga is a pretty famous league played in Germany. It's what, 11-round team tournament, so both these guys are probably, I don't know, maybe board 1 or board 2 for their team and trying to show their dominance. And black need to play for win, so of course he played the Caro Kann. And anyhow, after this position, black is simply, if he's given time, going to try to get his knight to g6 or e6, probably the g6 square, and then consider pushing these pawns, as we normally see here, and probably he'll develop his bishop at some point, right? But of course, a lot of it depends on what white does, right? We always need to be flexible more than ever in this opening setup, because if white goes crazy on the queen side, we might find some really good tactical opportunity to stop those advances. And if white starts going crazy on the king side, well, we'll need to be prepared for that one too, right? Anyways, in the game here, white castled, which is the normal option to try to avoid transpositions. As mentioned, queen c2 would transpose into the main line. We'll look at h5 next time, which seems crazy, but it's actually a very reasonable main line. The main point is after castling, we play h4, stopping white's plan of knight g3 with a very exciting game. But this time, white will be just simply going for castles. The other one move that's possible is the move bishop e3. White is just saying he wants to remain flexible again. He doesn't want to commit to castling kingside or queenside, and he's just going to develop his minor pieces before the majors are castling. This is fine, but the one problem here is he removes flexibility from his position. For one thing, he's not going to go for bishop f4 once he's played bishop e3. And the other problem is, well, now we could play knight d7 and we get our knight to f8 in time. Notice how when white played queen c2 early on, we had to move the h-pawn, and that could have been a weakness. Now when white plays queen c2, knight f8, and we just defend the pawn in time. And we're doing pretty fine. There's been a couple of games here. None of them are too dangerous for us. For instance, as we can see here, castle and queen side is the most popular choice. Lead chess. Wow, look at all the games in lead chess here. But it's not very smart. We go queen a5 and just start launching ourselves. And after the move king b1, we play the move b5. The game is complicated. Now, okay, white has done really well in the database for some reason, but let's just prove why that doesn't mean anything, because obviously we're being unbiased, and black's obviously doing great here. h4 is the most common move. That's not a good move. Black starts the attack, and I mean, white can choose whether to play b3 or a3. b3 already, he scored worse with good reason. That's a very bad move. What black can do now is play the move queen c7. This move does a couple things. Possibly prepares move a5. But also, for instance, if h5 is played, yeah, we'll go here. And it turns out if white's pushing this pawn, that doesn't do anything. We just block the attack, right? So if white tries to push other pawns, like, I don't know with what, maybe the move g3, which is the most common, that's not a threat either. We have stopped the c4 plan, because if white ever does c4, we open the b file. And we're not going to play a4 yet. If we played a4 right now, white would be able to block the attack. So that's not our idea. But we're just going to remain flexible. And I don't know, maybe what's the best option here? h6 is being given as a decent option here for black. The point is white's attack is actually pretty bad, and black in the long term will be able to generate counterplay. He might even just put his rook on d8 and play in the center, right? And white will not be able to attack us, so we are better because our attack is strong. Another option, I think, as we saw if we went back a little bit, is if white decides to play move a3 instead. But this creates its own source of weaknesses, really bad weaknesses on the dark squares. Again, we go back to c7. We've done our job of provoking a weakness. The queen isn't needed there anymore. And now, I guess after move h5, which seems most natural, black can actually play the surprising rook a b8. Preparing the plan of going a5 and b4. And yeah, again, the problem is white cannot. This is a very hard pawn structure to attack. And this is why I think white has generally stopped castling queenside. Because he figured out, if I just push my h-pawn a bunch, who cares? I'm just not going to win. And the fact that we have an extra f-pawn to defend is very nice for us. So this is why white normally realizes the dangers here. Now, it's not that white can't attack. It is possible for white to attack here. But h4, h5 is not the way to do it, and that's the most obvious way you'd even try. The better way for white to play is probably to play more cautiously in the center and maybe trade pieces, but then he's only going for a small positional advantage, not the crazy attack he was looking for. So castling queenside, it's not terrible, but it's not really the best way to play for an edge, I would say. But knight g3 is not very good either. This time white says, I'll play a knight f5, I'll be crazy. And we just play the obvious g6. We just say, no, white, you're not doing any of that. We're going to play f5. We're going to make that knight move again. And the knight pretty much has to move. Now, I thought what was cool here is there's actually a high-level game in this position. Played 32 years ago, so way before this line was ever that popular. Well, I guess Korchnoi played it, so I guess it must have been a move. But I don't think it was that popular back then. It's much more popular now. Spassky castled queenside. But the problem is this allowed the obvious f5. And this threatens the move f4, which forced white to go back. And after bishop e6, which is better than the move queen a5, which is played in the game, black is much better. His attack is stronger, and again, having 4 pawns here is actually very helpful for black. It's really hard for white to attack this king. For instance, I guess let's look at a couple choices. King b1 would be one obvious choice here, but now black is a really mean move. He plays bishop d5, threatening to take the g2 pawn, and that is a threat. Normally you'd think, oh, white wants you to take this and then open this as a g-file, but not here. That bishop will be a super bishop, and there's just too many pawns. You're not going to get through them all. So white will have to defend the pawn, but he can't defend it with this rook because then he loses that pawn. So he'll have to play this move, and after b5, this is just terrible. Black's not even just going to, he doesn't need to pawn storm immediately. He's just asserting positional dominance, right? And again, we're seeing the ability to just play slow here and have a great position. I mean, I guess what is white going to play? This is actually strange how white's already feeling a little bit bound up. For instance, he cannot play bishop f4 because that would just lose to rook takes e2. And I don't know. I'm thinking maybe, what if he tries like a move like f3 that would hang this bishop? I mean, I guess he moves the bishop back to try to start attacking. But no, that's not going to work either. There's multiple good attempts here, but one good one is just queen c7, threatening the pawn. I guess you can try to defend that one. And then we will go for the pawn pushes, right? Simply slowly improving the position, and eventually there will be some sort of breakthrough. And yeah, white is actually just running out of plans here. That's the main problem. He doesn't really have a good idea. So going back here, the other move is c4, which seems reasonable to just say you're blocking the bishop. I'm going to play d5, but this allows a very important thematic idea. And this is the risk of white pushing pawns in front of his king. b5. We'll see this in the next chapter a lot more, but this is very threatening. Obviously, white can't take this. He's just going to get crushed immediately. But c5, which is the more obvious move, gives up the juicy d5 square. We just bring our bishop back, perhaps put it on f6. And after king b1, the one funny, strange move that needs to remember is actually the move a6. Because white had some tactical ideas of playing the move d5, right? And then if we took back with the pawn, we'd hang the b5 pawn. The problem for white is he's still worse. And I guess the one main move I want to illustrate, knight f4 seems natural, trying to win this annoying bishop, but we actually are happy to give up a bishop for this knight. Our knight will be really good in this resulting position, and white's knight is actually an important piece for him. For instance, let's say, we play bishop g5, we're threatening to take the knight. And we might think, ooh, there's a really good bishop on all these dark squares. But it turns out not really. We play around the dark squares, we already win a pawn here now, and we've asserted dominance, and it turns out the bishop cannot do that much anyways. Even though these squares don't look good, it only matters if white can effectively get a piece to attack them. It's really hard for white to maneuver this queen over to these squares. And in the meantime, we're not going to let him do it. We're just going to RAR attack him, attack all these weaknesses. As we see here, right, white is just overextended and been way too careless about this backwards pawn. So again, I think white players have tended to realize this. They've realized that castle and queenside is really risky. So they have actually generally not gone for this anymore. That's why the main line in this position after knight e2 is just castling kingside. Because white realizes if I castle queenside, the pawns are coming for me, and my attack isn't even that good. So now let's take a look at what happened in the game. Black played the move knight d7, preparing the move knight f8, and white played the move bishop f4, going for the trade, which again is sort of the point of his whole knight e2 idea, right? He wants to trade off bishops. Another move, though, is the move knight g3. And again, this is always a thematic idea that we need to remember. White is thinking about going either to f5 or h5, or even bishop f5, trying to trade off these bishops. And if we are not careful, sometimes this can develop into some sort of dangerous attack idea. But normally, black should meet this with the move g6, simply stopping these advances. And the knight will have to move at some point, so it's not like black lost a tempo. Of course, there are some cons of this move. It does weaken the dark squares. And white can move this knight to e4, which is definitely probably the best choice for him. If, for instance, he just plays like a normal move, like, I don't know, bishop h6, we're still going to do fine here after the move f5. This is thematic. We might play bishop f8 also, knight f6. And, the pawn structure might not look great for us, but the position is still completely sound for black. For instance, I guess queen d2, preparing to bring these guys in. What is the best choice here? We have a lot of reasonable tries, but black should be okay here. After even just, do we want to take or play knight f6 first? Again, the position should be okay for him. So knight e4 is the more critical try. And now the bishop's attacked, so we have to bring it back. It's best to bring it back to f8. This is probably going to go to g7 at some point. We're probably going to play f5 soon. And, we have some pressure in the long diagonal. Bishop f4 is the best move for white here now. The other tries to move rook e1, which is also reasonable. But now we just force some trades. We play f5, get our pawn to a good square here. And I don't know, knight g3, knight g3 or knight g5. We simply take. And now we play knight f6, right? And we just have all the solid moves. And the one point worth mentioning is bishop g5 is never a danger. We can play the move h6 against this. And if the bishop moves back, it just wasted time. And now we're going to play in the queen side, right? Maybe the bishop retreats. And, bishop e6, a5, a4. And again, it's really hard for white to push the center pawns. The moment he pushes this pawn, this becomes a weakness. Concretely here, this would just be really bad thanks to knight g4. But even if that wasn't possible, there's still issues here. And obviously, black might just end up doing this anyways. So white should play the move bishop f4 here instead. And this is actually sort of a tricky move. Bishop c7 looks like it's a possible idea in one really fun line. Black now usually should play the move knight b6. This is the best try here. Simply playing the knight in d5. It does look like, though, it allows a really funny tactic, the move bishop c7. It turns out, though, that black can outsmart white through all the calculation by trapping this knight. The idea is after queen takes e7, knight takes f6 to fork these guys. But it turns out the knight is trapped. Queen e7 trapping the knight. And rook e1 looks dangerous because after bishop e6, white says, I will continue attacking you. But we say, nope, you can play f5. And I guess, you could threaten queen h5, but it doesn't matter. Black plays queen d7, threatening to take. And after queen h5, that defended. The idea is that we don't want to take here, and we don't have to, but better is just h6, and we just defend. So that doesn't work. So the better move for white is the move rook e1 now. White is basically saying that I have a slightly better position because I have the better pawn structure here, and my pieces are centralized. That makes sense, but now we can start pushing back these seemingly well-placed pieces. First, we push back the bishop, then we push back the knight, and it does weaken dark squares, but we gain space, and we do want to play this move. This pawn structure looks sort of strange, but it might be useful in the middle game, right? After knight g5, we'll take on e1, forcing queen takes e1, and there was one game here, and unfortunately black went on to lose it, but if he had just played the simple h6, again pushing the knight back from its active square, and developed, the position would have been completely fine for him. And what we're going to do here is play knight f6, probably king h7, maybe knight e4 soon, and get ready to play some pawn restricting moves on the queen side. And it's easy for white to overextend, right? Like we might just think, why doesn't white just start pushing around black immediately? Well, it turns out it's very hard to push these pawns anymore. I mean, he can try that, maybe obvious moves like rook d1, but it's not so simple here. And what black's probably going to do if he's given time, which he will have, is probably queen c7, rook e8, and you know, a knight might find its way to e4, after which it's not clear at all. It's really hard for white to play d5 here. That's all I'm saying. So anyhow, going back to this position, after bishop f4, which is played in the game, black now played knight f8, which is a reasonable move. I also want to mention that taking in f4 is also not a bad idea, but, you know, knight f8 is probably the most simple try we're going to go here. And, you know, now white can choose whether to force the trade or not. So white is thinking that after he trades these bishops, that he'll be left with a better bishop pair, but we'll actually learn this isn't exactly necessarily the case. Here in the game, white played queen d2, simply supporting the bishop. The idea might be to just take everything and then play queen f4. But it turns out bishop d6 is also a popular move, right? Just simply going for the trade. And after this, going knight g3. And now white again threatens to do this, so we play our thematic g6. And after knight e4, the queen is forced back, but it doesn't really matter because we're just going to kick it back with either f5 or bishop f5. For instance, after rook e1, black will play bishop f5. We fully developed. And after queen c3, which is the best try here, I mean, you can't move the knight, otherwise you might end up losing a piece. We play king g7, defending this f6 pawn. And now what we can do here is trade off our bishop for the knight, right? If the white does not have the two bishops, I would prefer black in this position because it's no skill, right? Once you, I don't know, normal move here, once you can even just take right now, black is the much more comfortable position here. I mean, f5, you don't have to play it yet. Maybe you want to delay it, but I would just rather be black here. It's much easier to play. This bishop isn't, you know, bishops have too much skill and they're really hard to maneuver and outplay a knight anyway. The knight in e6 will be just annoying. It just starts threatening stuff, and white just has to be scared. So that would not be a good idea, I would say. But anyhow, queen d2 is playing the game. This might be more critical, just because of one really weird nuance that neither side saw. Black played the obvious knight g6, thinking, why not force my opponent to activate my queen for me? It turns out, though, there's one nuance that makes this line a slight problem. It's probably better for black to actually take here. Now if queen takes, white just wasted time, so white will take with the knight. And now we play queen d6. The key point is, we didn't provoke, and unlike in the game, it might look really similar, but we didn't provoke the, well, what is the reason actually? There's just one concrete line. The knight's on f4. It's not on g3 instead. And the knight is not as well placed here because it's going to go back anyways. And now it will have wasted time once it does that. And the plan is simply to develop this bishop. For instance, the one key move I want to mention is after rook fe1, played in one game, the move bishop g4 is the star move here. And this is thematic in many lines. All we're saying is, white, please move a pawn and weaken your king. And either pawn move is going to be weakening. f3, of course, is the really stupid one, because we bring the bishop back, and now e3 is always a weakness. We'll just try to find a way to put something here eventually. That's never good for white. So white should just never let us do that. But the other possibility is even h3. h3 is less weakening, but that also might become a target to sacrifice in h3 later on. Anyhow, the better try is, after rook fe1, bishop g4. You know, white is in the game here traded and played the move h3. And now black played bishop d7. Bishop c8 was also fine. And the point is to bring out the knight next turn, and he's very solid. Again, these pawns are not that strong. They look good, but trust me, they're really hard to advance. Or don't trust me, that's okay. I won't trust myself either. Anyhow, going back to the game, hopefully we're now finally done with all this theory so we can actually look at this game for once, not just cover every sideline that none of the players thought of. Black played the obvious knight g6. And here again, we might think, okay, isn't white going to trade off bishops? But white was really intent on not doing that. He played bishop g3 instead, so I guess he wasn't forced to take. Again, he could have taken here, and this is actually the best move. White has one annoying idea. After this, he plays queen h6, knight g3, again attacking these squares. And I have to admit, I think white's actually slightly better here. I wasn't unable to find complete equality. Now, black gets really close to equalizing, but I don't really like this endgame for him. For instance, he can play the move, white can play the move rook ag1, after which this is supposed to be the best try. Which something just tells me this is easier to play for white. I think there's just been too much simplification. And if we trade off the bishop for the knight, I mean, that's, that's too much, skill. I don't like having the bishop. The other problem is after the move queen c2, it's very sneaky and strange. But black just hasn't been able to get the counterplay that he desires in this position. And I think white's just more comfortable after normal moves. So that's why it's a one small nuance, but forcing that knight to f4 really helps us because the knight in g3 is actually pretty effective. So after bishop g6, though, black decided to go crazy. And this objectively wasn't best, but I mean, white was confused. Black played h5, so, I mean, why not, right? You're a GM, you might as well start pushing your rook pawns. The idea is not just to play h4, but also to scare white, right? And I guess it had this effect. I mean, it'd be sort of scary if a GM did that against me, just h4 randomly. Now white played rook fe1. Simple move. Black developed, white played knight f4. This was actually not a good move. I really want to go over the structures and trades here because it's really important to understand this pawn structure, right? You'll probably get in like 30 or Caro Kann games if you end up playing it. The question is, what minor pieces do you want to trade? And white thought, if I trade off this knight, if I trade off dark squared bishops and knights, I will be better because we'll only have light squared bishops yet. And black agreed, but it turns out that's not true. It turns out trading off both these minor pieces actually gives black a good position. So it's important to understand that this trade is fine for him. Okay, actually the best move order was queen c7 to gain a tempo and force this. And yeah, at first sight we would think that white's better because it looks like our bishops is on the color of our same pawns. White's pawns are in dark squares. But that's true, but black is still doing fine here. It turns out putting the pawns on light squares is totally fine because it restricts white's bishop even more than ours. And for instance, how is white going to push this pawn majority, right? It's actually pretty difficult. Black's better. He might play c5, rook a d8 or rook a e8, also possible. Or also double in the e file. That's maybe even the best try. And it's really hard to push these pawns forward. For instance, I guess one obvious move would be to move bishop b3. The reason is if you go here immediately, you just lose the pawn. So that's not very good. So b3 would prevent that one. But now black can play the move a5. And now maybe a4 is going to be a possibility, annoying the queen side. And for instance, if white plays rook a d1 now, black can play the move g6, a solid try, with king g7 coming next. And again, the fact that pawns are in light squares doesn't hurt us because white's bishop is not that good. And, our bishop is happy. And again, try to find a way for white to make progress. It's not that easy. Like, for instance, you'd think white wants to play c4, d5. So let's say white just retreats the bishop to do that. That will not work here. We play a4, pressuring the pawn, pretty much forcing the move c4, right? I mean, if white's going to play b4, he's just asking to get blockaded. Also, this allows him to move a3, but I can imagine this is not going to be smart. The blockade would be terrible. So c4 would be the way to play for the edge, but then we don't have to worry about anything because d5 will not happen. D5 immediately is just not good because we can just take this pawn. Or no, we don't want it. Why would we do that? Can you actually take this? This is funny. You can actually take the pawn because of this really funny tactic. But okay, even if you didn't have that resource, you would just blockade the pawn, right? Provoke the move f3, and if white's dumb enough to actually do that, then you can just go back, and this is a massive edge for black. The pawn's been completely blockaded, f3 is weakened the king, and we're going to just keep attacking. And this bishop is just out there doing nothing. So again, the position's never that simple. But black believed white, so he took with his bishop, and then he played the move queen d5. Again, black should have just taken here and played g6, after which it's objectively equal, but actually black's probably more comfortable after pushing his pawns and going king g7. But black didn't see that. Instead, he played queen d5, and now some bad things started happening. White managed to consolidate. Knight h4 was not exactly black's greatest try. Even though black created a weakness here, white was able to push his center pawns effectively, and that's what happened. So black did not get his pieces in a good configuration. White's definitely better here. But it's still hard to push the pawns. Rook c8 seems strange, but the pawns aren't going anywhere immediately. So white said, okay, I'll push the a pawn. Black said, I'll scare you. White said, I don't know what I'm doing. Black retreated. And finally, white made the decisive or really big error in this position. He played the move rook takes e8 check. This just activates black's rook for him. Now, the best move is the move queen c3, and the idea is just to trade off queens. A little bit hard to see. Basically, the point is, with this queen here, white doesn't want to just push pawns, but if he can kick back the queen, maybe then he can do this idea, right? For instance, I don't know, let's say black plays g5, then queen c1 is a good move. And the problem with the queen trade now is, unlike in previous positions, white has the two bishops, and yeah, these pawns might not be advanced immediately, but with these two bishops here, it's going to be hard for black to make any progress in attack. But after rook takes e8, suddenly black has the counterplay. That f3 move weakened e3, and here comes the pieces. So white just allowed black to start attacking. White thought he was making progress here, but black was the one making the true progress. And white cracked here and now took on e3. He was obviously scared of black just taking an f1. For instance, if white did not go for this trade, he understandably knew that he would lose, he'd lose his light squared bishop, and black would have the attack in an opposite color bishop queen endgame. And this is generally really good for the side that's attacking, right? Because now this bishop can't defend what this one attacks. And assuming this bishop can find its way in the game, that could be really risky. But the game would go on, and white's actually not going too badly. But when he took an e3, that backfired. Rook takes e3. And after queen b4, which was not really the best try, black played h3, and the attack was on. Now, black has something even more brilliant. Definitely an idea to memorize. Rook takes f3. The sequence is g takes f3, queen e3 check, preparing queen takes f3 next. And I'm not sure if black saw any of this. Maybe he thought king g2 would have refuted this, but then that would have allowed him to move bishop h3. Pretty funny, right? And now, well, if you take, you just get mated. So that's not very good. But yeah, if you don't take, that's not very good either. Okay, now like that. What am I doing? So really brilliant tactics were possible here. You know, this is what happens in the Caro Kann. It's very exciting. But h3 still gave white a really bad position, and black had a great structure, right? After this happened, white played queen d2, trying to save himself, but queen g5 made it even worse for white, threatening to take here. And white was hoping the trade would be okay for him, or at least make him not lose, but that wasn't the case. The trade happened. Black weakened white's king and just played move g6, just playing super calm. And the structure is terrible for white. He is down a pawn, which doesn't help, but you might think, okay, maybe these pawns compensate. But the answer is they don't, because they're all weaknesses. This bishop is garbage. This bishop is much better than the light square bishop, right? I mean, just this queen's going to go to f4, and how will you defend the pawns? Well, white tried to, but, you know, more pieces kept coming. And after queen e2, white was barely defending, and after queen f4, he, kept trying to defend, so black repeated the position to reach the 40th move. I guess black was, down on time. Then he played king g7 just to make the opponent miserable and rub it in. King h6, I mean, this isn't really necessary, but I guess you might as well do something. And now white started advancing these pawns. And his idea was to play d5 to try to get counterplay. And to be fair, this is actually probably not a bad idea, but after queen takes b6, black is the one with a bigger attack. And neither side played this perfectly. Objectively, white should still be defending this, but he ended up not defending it. So what can you say? I guess his technical blunder was in this position. When did he finally blunder here? So yeah, here it looks like it's still fine. And then black won anyways. So I don't know why white resigned. He could have still played on. Now he probably would have lost because the pawns are coming, and this pawn's not that dangerous. But why did he resign here? It's very strange. So I don't know. White's actually not completely lost here. So I guess even good players resign in losing positions. It says black wins. Maybe white timed out. I should try to find this real game. I don't know. But either how, we know the right result happened. Black won and destroyed the opposition. And hopefully you guys learned something about the knight e2 line of the Caro Kann, which again is reached from this position, right? We'll go over where knight e2 happens. And congrats for sure to black here, who, yeah, definitely showed the opponent that he was not to be messed with, although I don't know who would want to be messed with. But once they reach this position, knight e2 is a reasonable try by white that you definitely need to be aware of. But with proper play, you could see the ideas come to life. And the main thing I want you guys to remember is what trades are okay, right? It's okay to leave your opponent with only light square bishops left on the board. That trade doesn't seem good for us, but it turns out it does end up working out. Anyways, that was episode 3. Next time we will be actually taking a look at titled Tuesday games played in this 6c3 line, right? And we'll be looking at more theory and hopefully continue working our way to finally gain an understanding, a complete understanding of the Caro Kann.